When scientists were studying cannabis, they were able to basically make the compounds radioactive, and then they would follow them to see, okay, so how is this working? Because they wanted to know how are we getting these effects? And they discovered that we have cannabinoid receptors in our brain and in our spinal column. That's the CB1 receptor. And then we have CB2 receptors basically everywhere else. So the CB1 receptors, those are the receptors that THC really interacts with. So when you consider that it's in the brain and the spinal column and you get all the psychoactivity, it's kind of, it makes sense. Then your CB2 receptors are everywhere else, all in your soft tissues, in your skin, and everywhere. So the CBD compound is what really interacts with those. It doesn't attach or anything else, but it modulates those receptors. So basically we have these receptors. So when we ingest cannabis, in whatever way we do it, they go to those receptors and then they create a response, a bodily response. So when you have the CB1 receptors, so, for example, any of the other, your example of the myrcene, it's not a wives' tale. They know that myrcene reduces the blood-brain barrier for these cannabinoids. So you get an even greater input of THC into the CB1, which is in your brain and in your spinal cord, because the myrcene has opened up that barrier that kind of keeps your brain separate from everything else in case you have a toxin or a, bacteria or whatever. So these CB1 receptors, they have an affinity for particular cannabinoids, which then we get the effects of those cannabinoids. So what else can I tell you about the CB1 and CB2? I think that's really about it, and for example, like CBD, you were talking about when people take too much THC and they get very, very uncomfortable. It's because the CB1 receptors are open and getting flooded with THC. CBD can block that. So if you get very high and you take an isolate of CBD, because you don't want to take any more THC, you can take an isolate, it's going to block those receptors and it's going to bring you down.
Interesting. So